this bill as it goes forward. Thank you, sir.
I call Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, it's really sad that none of the national members of Parliament can spend more than 3 minutes espousing the virtues of charter schools because there just aren't any. And I noticed that last member barely got to 3 minutes before he had to start talking about other aspects of the bill. So devoid of merit is this idea of charter schools. But you've only got to look at the sponsoring ministers to understand that, because I think it must be an absolute embarrassment to that government that the minister introducing this legislation was the Minister for Amnesia, John Banks. He's the sponsoring minister of this legislation. Can anyone opposite tell me of a minister that lacks more credibility than the minister introducing this demolition to our education system? Well, maybe there's one other, and that's the other sponsoring minister, and that's Hekia Parata. Can anyone tell me of two ministers who are lacking less credibility at the moment than Hekia Parata and the duo with John Banks? It's like Batman and Robin gone wrong. But that's the two ministers sponsoring this bill, and that's probably just about all New Zealanders need to know about whether this is going to be successful or not, because those two ministers are the ministers who have wrecked education already. The best idea that Hekia Parata has had in her short time as the Minister of Education was that she wanted to dumb down our education system by, yes, increasing class sizes. So that's the qualification that Hekia Parata has for being the minister in charge of this bill. And then there's John Banks, who's the co-sponsoring minister. Well, this was a deal done over the teacups, and it's gone bad from there on in. Because this is nothing about increasing student achievement. And I think when the last speaker spoke, he alluded us to that, because where was he drawing his inspiration from for his speech? He drew it from a country in an area where they had much worse educational outcomes than New Zealand. He quoted those much worse educational outcomes than New Zealand and said, why don't we do what they're doing? Well, that's the big mistake that's going on here, is that they are so devoid of ideas opposite, that they are copying countries that are below us in the world rankings on student achievement. So clearly this has absolutely not one thing to do with student achievement. So what is it about, Mr Speaker? Well, it's about putting money into the pockets of the likes of Destiny Church. Destiny Church lining up to become a charter school with no rules and regulations, a whole pile of taxpayer money, but no accountability back to the public, because listen to this, Mr Speaker, the Destiny Church will not be under the Official Information Act as a charter school. There will be no scrutiny from the public about how the Destiny Church is using taxpayer money on their little venture under the guise of charter schools, which apparently the members opposite are inviting us and trying to trick the public into believing is about improving student achievement. I think all of the New Zealand public listening to this debate will understand that the motivation for the Destiny Church in operating a charter school won't be primarily about student achievement. They have other agendas, and so will many other groups who will be lining up behind Destiny Church to get their hands on taxpayer money with no accountability. No accountability, Mr Speaker, because the Official Information Act will not apply so that taxpayers can find out what's really happening to their dollar in the school with no rules, in the school with no qualified teachers if necessary, because there is nothing in the legislation that we are debating here today that actually requires any qualified or registered teacher to be in any one of these schools. And if I'm wrong, I invite the next National Party Speaker to put that straight, because I can see nowhere in this legislation where there is a requirement for a charter school to have any registered teacher on their staff. But it's no surprise coming from that party, because I don't know what they've got against qualified and registered teachers, but they started this in the early childhood education sector. So they started this in 2010 when they decided to cut the funding that actually supported the employment of qualified teachers in early childhood education. That party said then that they didn't believe in having 100% qualified teachers in early childhood education, so they cut the funding that actually underpinned and allowed the sector to employ qualified teachers. The writing was on the wall then, Mr Speaker, because it started in early childhood education. Now they're attacking the rest of the education sector with this idea that anyone will do. Anyone will do. Doesn't need to be anyone who understands the pedagogy or has any training in the art, I will say, and the craft of teaching. So that's the vision for this country. But it's really very disappointing because John Key used to say, and in fact it was only just a few months ago, he was trying to convince parents that it's not the class sizes that matter, it's the quality of teaching that we're getting into our schools. That was John Key just a few months ago. Now he's telling New Zealanders, don't get hung up, he says, on the fact that teachers without qualifications will be able to teach New Zealand children at charter schools. Another flip-flop from this Prime Minister. And it's disappointing. It's disappointing because New Zealanders need to be able to take their Prime Minister at his word. They need to be able to take their Prime Minister at his word. But this clearly shows that they can't, because one minute he's saying it's the quality of teachers that matters, and then the next minute he's saying, don't get hung up if you haven't got a qualified teacher in front of your child's class. It doesn't matter. You cannot take this Prime Minister at his word, as clearly has been demonstrated there. And I think that's a sad time for New Zealanders when they can't trust what the Prime Minister says. Yesterday, he was trying to tell New Zealanders that he had voted for the age of 20 for alcohol law reform. Clearly, the records show that he voted for it to be kept at 18. So we're just getting now into territory where it's very, very difficult for New Zealanders to trust anything that their Prime Minister says. And when he said that it's the quality of teachers that matter, not the class size, he says, don't worry your pretty little heads about that, parents, because Prime Minister John knows best. Well, Prime Minister John's now changed his mind. Prime Minister John now says that the quality of teaching doesn't matter. And it's because he's run out of ideas, though. That's why he's changing his mind, because he's run out of ideas along with the rest of them over there. So devoid are they of any ideas about how to actually improve our educational outcomes in this country that they are now looking to countries like the United States and the UK for inspiration. Well, here's some news for the members opposite. They have significantly worse educational achievement and student achievement than we do right now in New Zealand. Why are they looking to countries that fail to improve student education instead of actually looking and enhancing the success that New Zealand has always had? And I would argue that a significant amount of that success has been because of the quality of our teachers, not because we're dumbing down the education system as that government is inclined to do and as they have proven time and time again. Mr Speaker, this is very bad legislation. I'm proud that the Labour Party is opposing this, and I think it tells New Zealand that we're going to need a Labour-led government to get any progress in a quality education for our children.
Mr Speaker.
I call Scott Simpson.
Mr Speaker, choice, opportunity and hope. Choice, opportunity and